So welcome back again. In this lesson, we're going to talk about class extensions. And what a class extension is essentially exactly the same thing as a category in Objective-C, but for Swift. So we use class extensions to add new features to existing classes or the classes that we don't have access to, or we use class extensions to add new features to our own classes simply for the purpose of modularizing our code. So in this lesson, I'm going to show you how to use class extensions, which is going to be rather simple. And then I'm going to show you a peek essentially of an app that I'm developing myself. And you can see how widely I'm using class extensions just so that, I make sure that my code is simple and readable, and my colleagues who are working with me on the app, they can also easily understand my process. So let's go ahead into Xcode, and I'm going to start a new project. This time, command line tool, Swift. And I'm going to call it class extensions. And then in here, class extensions are very, very simple. Here is what we do. I'm going to go ahead and say I have a class, and that class I'm going to call it my class. Doesn't have a superclass or does have superclass, it doesn't matter. Function do something, and that's again very simple, something you have seen many, many times. So it has a function that does something. And then I'm going to go ahead and say extension, and this extension is for my class, and my extension has a function, let's call it do another thing. So that's about that. I have a class, and that class has an extension. And if I go ahead and say, let's use this by saying var my object is my class. So I made an object of that class, and I can simply go ahead and say my object dot, and now we have access to both of these functions, the function from the actual class and the function from the extension class. And that's about that. That's how you do extensions. You write extension, the name of your class, and then it is as if you're inside the body of that class, and you're writing your stuff whichever way you like it to be. One thing that you have to keep in mind is that you cannot do something like this. For instance, you cannot say I have a string within the body of the extension. These kind of things, stored properties, you must have them in the original class declaration. So you have to actually do it here. Primarily we use, or at least I use, class extensions for situations when I want to do functions, if I want to add extra functions there, and particularly for when I want to do something that's called a class function. That's something I'm going to show you in the next lesson. This error, obviously you know what's happening. It's that this object is an explicitly unwrapped optional, and it's saying, well, you need an initialization. I'm going to say, if this was the case, just to silence that error, I'm going to say give it a default value. So that is extension. Now let's go ahead and use extensions on an existing class, something that we didn't write. So I'm going to go ahead and say remove all of these, say extension string. So I want to add a new feature or a new function to a string class. And the thing I want to add is this, what we did before, which was numbers only. So it's going to be much easier. I think it was in the lesson that we dealt with text field delegates here. And in here, I had this function. I'm going to copy all of these. Of course, we have to change some of it, but doesn't matter. I'm going to bring it to my new extension and say there is a function, and this function is called numbers only. And what it is going to do is going to return a string which is only the numbers of that the input value. So I'm going to go in here, say let numbers is that, remove character set is perfect, separated them perfect, let join blah blah, that's perfect. So what I want to do is this, at the end in here I want to say return. What do I want to return? I want to return the joined version. So I want to get the characters in something, and then that thing, I want to make sure that I return the one that only has numbers. Now, what is the thing that I want to get from? That is self, because self is this string. So I'm going to get the stuff from self, break it by this character set, everything that is not numbers, and then add them to each other and then return that one. So now I have this function, and let me get rid of all the comments so it's easier. I can, zoom into the whole thing easier. And then I'm going to go ahead and say I have variable my_str, which is of the type string, and it is actually this set of characters, a lot of numbers and a lot of random characters. And I'm going to say print numbers only is, what is that? That is going to be, oh, I don't need a semicolon. I'm typing back and forth between Objective-C and Swift, and it's going to be my_str dot, what is it? Numbers only. So I can actually go ahead and say, hey, get the my_string, which is a string, and apply a function called numbers only. And this function only works here because I have the extension for a string in here. If we run this now, we should be able to see exactly what we expected to see. It should say numbers only is these parts, which I don't have any way of making sure of it, but it is 548, yes, and 98 and 46, and then at the end it's got a 560. Perfect. So that is how you add extensions. Extensions are a very, very common way. Like I promised, I'm going to show you an app of mine. Here's the app. We are kind of halfway through. As you can imagine, there is so much still happening and we haven't finished a lot of the different things in here. But as you can see, every class is broken into so many extensions, simply because I want my code to be easier and easily readable for my colleagues and anyone else who might be accessing this. So for instance, if I go to cloud data, read single, whatever, this is all the code that there is in this one file. This is all the code that is in here. This is all the code that is in here. It makes things a lot easier for me. Let me show you another one that kind of, perhaps makes easier sense and a simpler one. Here, for instance, I have a property view controller that is, a view controller like the ones we have seen in the past. And then my property view controller has something that adds some borders. It has something that adds the content view. It has something to deal with the map. It has something to deal with the labels in it. But each of them has its own extension, simply because by having the extensions, I make sure that my code is far more modularized, and it's also a lot easier for everybody else to read it. If I tell a colleague of mine that there seems to be an issue with the map in the property view controller, they know they have to immediately come in here and they work on this one file, which really makes our lives a lot easier, specifically when we're working together on larger projects. We will see these in the future as well when we work on version control and how you have to, essentially go with the best strategies of making sure that you and other people can work easily with each other. So with that in mind, let's move on to our next lesson. This was extensions, and I'll see you in the next one.